In 1827, Czar Nicholas I decreed that Jewish boys and young men be conscripted into the Russian army, a policy that shook Jewish life in Russia to its core. Communities debated and attempted various strategies to confront this crisis, and in that context, the Tzemach Tzedek was asked whether a particular approach was permissible. In this class, we'll explore the historical backdrop, unpack the Tzemach Tzedek's responsum, and work together to understand its meaning. The Rivash is Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Sheshes, and he lived in Algiers. Although he started his life in Spain, he lived in Algiers between the years 1391 and 1408. And the question that he was asked occurred during those years. It's Shalos HaTshuvos Yud Zayin, Siman Yud Zayin, and Shalos HaTshuvos HaRivash. The question, we actually know who it was written to, because Tez Zayin and Yud Zayin is addressed to the same rabbi, to the same person. And his name is Yehuda, and he is in a town in western Algeria that's called Honain. Hope I'm pronouncing it correct. Honain or Honain or something like that. And this Yehuda lived over there. And the Rivash is writing to this Yehuda that he should send the tshuva all the way to Tuat. Tuat, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, is a very far away. It's 1,000 kilometers down, and it's in the Sahara Desert. And as we're going to see, the location of Tuat and it being in the Sahara Desert is crucial for the context of what this Shaila and Shuva is about. Oid Sha'alta. So this, Rabbi Yehuda asked the Shaila. What was the Shaila? Allah Yehudim, about the Jewish people, Sheholchim b'shayaro, they travel in a caravan, b'gmalim, with camels, im orchas Yishmaelim, with a group of Arabs, b'midbar ha'godav ha'anoira. So using the term b'midbar ha'godav ha'anoira, he means the Sahara Desert, this huge desert that is south of these North African countries in Algeria and Africa and Morocco. And it's a very significant desert. And there are Jews who travel with the caravans going through this desert. And everyone knows, because they're not riding on horses, but they're taking camels, so therefore everyone knows, everyone knows that they are desecrating Shabbos, and this is being done publicly by the very fact that they're traveling with the caravan. So what is this? What's the context here? So the context over here is this Yehuda lives in Honain. So one day he wakes up and he and other people in the Jewish community, they look out the window and they see there's a caravan that's traveling, that's leaving town, and it's with camels. And Jews are a part of the caravan. Now, if it was a group going on horses, they're like, hey, today is Thursday, they're going to the next town over, they'll be there in 4 hours, and fine, there's no shaila. Of course, there's always a possibility of Chol Shabbos, but it's not definite. But if you see them going out on camels, why are they going on camels? Camels aren't so good for travel. They travel slower. The only reason why you're going on a camel is because you're going south and you're going through a long journey through the Sahara Desert. And by definition, that's a journey that's more than 6-7 days. And so therefore, we know for sure that it's going to happen on Shabbos. So now it's parhesia because the whole community sees them going out on camels. Now, where's the Chilul Shabbos over here? Maybe they're going to stop on Shabbos? No. Because of the sakana, what's going to happen on Shabbos is they're going to say, Pikuach Nefesh is doicha everything. Or at least it's doicha Shabbos. And so because Pikuach Nefesh is doicha Shabbos, well, you're going to stay in the Sahara Desert on your own? That's dangerous. No person would do that. And any Rav, if you called him in that moment, would say, continue on with the caravan on Shabbos. But the issue over here is not the decision that happens late on Friday. The issue that we have over here is that on Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday, they're choosing to going out on the caravan. What's the Isser? What are the Issurim that we're talking about, just to understand? So number one, there's the Isser of Tchumen. There's an Isser, you're not allowed to go too far, you're not allowed to travel too far from a certain point on Shabbos, and that would apply in this case, and Tchumen, it could be it's midaraisa, it could be it's midarabana, that's a whole thing, but either way, we're dealing here with an isser, a serious isser, number one. Number two, there's isser darabanan, that you're not allowed to ride an animal, bichlal, on Shabbos. And number three, there's also a concept of shvisas behemtoi, and that is a person's animal is not allowed to be doing work for you on Shabbos. A person's animal has to be resting, and possibly, although there's some discussion about this, possibly that's also an issue that we have over here. And so, v'lachein, this Reb Yehuda had a shaila, nistapakta, you have a doubt, imroi limches biyadim, do you need to make a macha? In other words, sometimes a person does an isser, maybe it's less pressing to make a macha, but over here, if it's paresya, if it's barabim, so now it's more important to make the macha. So, do you need to do it or not? Now, what's the argument for not? The argument for not is, what's the isser? What's the problem? Like at the end of the day, it is pikuach nefesh on Friday, when it becomes time to rest, it is pikuach nefesh. So maybe lechatchila, it's mutter, so that's why there's a shaila. Yehuda is not sure, and he turns to Rivash, who's all the way in eastern Algeria. Reb Yehuda is in western Algeria, and again he's saying, send the answer that I'm going to give you, send it all the way down to Tuat, which is 1,000 kilometers south in the middle of the Sahara, because obviously the Yidden who are living over there are very much associated with this whole question of journeying as part of the caravans, and therefore they definitely needed to know the answer. So how is the Rivash going to address this issue? He turns to the Gemara Shabbos, Daf Yutes Amar Aleph, where it teaches as follows. Ein mafligim b'sfina, we do not travel in a ship, in a boat, pachais megimel yamim kaidon l'Shabbos, less than 3 days before Shabbos. Basically, in short, this means Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, a person should not travel by boat. Now the question is, why? What is the meaning of this din? So the Rambam follows the Shitta of the Rif and offers the following interpretation for what is the issue the Gemara is dealing with here. Says the Rambam in Hilchos Shabbos, Perek Lamid, Halacha Yud Gimel. We do not travel by ship less than 3 days before Shabbos. Why? Today, the reason is that you should regain your calm before Shabbos. You shouldn't be in too much pain when Shabbos comes. In other words, the Rambam understands this issue as a din in Oinig Shabbos. And in fact, Perek Lamed of Hilchos Shabbos, where the Rambam placed this din, is all about the halachas of Oinig Shabbos. And what the Rambam's concern is, let's say you go on a day journey on Thursday, and you finish. You start the journey on Thursday, and you finish on Thursday. But you're doing it by ship, so there's something called seasickness, and it takes time to recover. Shabbos is going to come, and you're not going to have Oinig Shabbos, and that's what the Gemara means over here. It's according to the Rambam, the Gemara isn't assuming you're going to be on the ship on Shabbos. The Gemara is assuming you will have already completed the journey before Shabbos, and nonetheless, don't do it not on Wednesday, not on Thursday, and not on Friday, because we want your Oinig Shabbos to be complete. This is the Rambam's interpretation, and again, the Rambam is following the Rif. The Rif also goes with this interpretation. Now, one of the commentators to the Rif is known as the Baal HaMoyer. His name was Reb Zrachia HaLevi, and he wrote Hasagas on the Rif, which means in a few areas he disagreed with the Rif, so he documented these in his Sefer. And he lived during the times of the Rambam. He lived in the 1100s in Provence. And he writes a different way of understanding this Gemara. V'li nira tam acher. I have a different understanding of what this 3-day rule is before Shabbos, that the Gemara says in the Masechah Shabbos. Shloisha yamin kaidon l'Shabbos, 3 days before Shabbos, kamei Shabbat mikri. It's called before Shabbos. In other words, the Wednesday and Thursday, Friday is already a hachana, preparation to Shabbos. And so therefore, if you're going to end up traveling Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and then you're going to end up remaining on board on Shabbos, and then it's going to be like, oh, it's pikuach nefesh. I can't stop my journey. I'm on the open seas. I need to continue doing melacha. So that doesn't look good. Because although you have the argument of pikuach nefesh then on Shabbos, but because you went out on a Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, so v'nire kemasna litchos es Shabbos, it looks like you're doing it in order to, and with the condition of actually violating Shabbos, and nothing stands in the way of pikuach nefesh, and so then when comes Shabbos, you're going to say, I have no choice, I have to continue doing Chilul Shabbos, whatever Chilul Shabbos is associated with riding a ship, which we're not going to get into that now. I'm going to have to continue doing that work. But if it's earlier in the week, so then it's not a problem. So you go out on a ship on Sunday, and so now it's distant from Shabbos. Comes Shabbos, and I'm like, I need to continue doing malacha because it's Pekuach Nefesh, so we don't have a problem with that. And concludes Reb Zrachi Alevi, and he says the same thing applies not only to a ship, but to any sort of travel. That if it is Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and you know that the inevitable result is that on Shabbos you're going to have to be Mechalel Shabbos, then you're not allowed to go out on Wednesday or Thursday or Friday, because it looks like you're violating Shabbos. If, however, it's Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, so because in time it's distant from Shabbos, go out, and then Shabbos you need to do malacha for Pekuach Nefesh, go ahead, you can go ahead and do the malacha. Who gives you this? Only Reb Zrachi Alevi gives you this understanding of the Gemara. The Rambam doesn't have a whole discussion about malacha on Shabbos and whether you're allowed to be on a ship on Shabbos and not. The Rambam doesn't get into the whole discussion. All the Rambam talks about is Oinig Shabbos. And as I said before, the simplest way of understanding the Rambam is that you take a day trip on Wednesday and you're back before Shabbos, or Thursday and you're back before Shabbos, or Friday and you're back before Shabbos. And nonetheless, the Rambam says don't do it because of Oinig Shabbos. But Reb Zrachi Alevi understands this as a din and actually malacha of Shabbos, a different one, the Isser of malacha. And here is where he tells us that what the Gemara is trying to tell us is that there's a difference between Sunday, Monday, Tuesday versus Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And with that, the Rivash says, I have my answer to this question about the Jews in Algeria who are joining these caravans. Says the Rivash in his conclusion, Kol sheyoytze min hayishuv b'shayara lemidbaris b'yom rishon v'yom sheni v'yom shlishi. Anyone who is leaving a town, joining a caravan, whether it's Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday, mutter, no problem. V'ein lo lihimana milatzes machmas haShabbos haba. You don't need to worry about the coming Shabbos. Sha'az, and when Shabbos comes, if indeed it is dangerous to remain behind, and you need to continue, and you have to be Mechal Shabbos, Pekuach Nefesh, mutter hu, it's permitted, I don't have a problem with it. What about the fact that the Rif and the Rambam didn't learn the Gemara this way? So he concludes by saying, Mekom hadin din emes. The din is still a true din, which at least some have understood him to mean. The Rambam doesn't tell you no to what Zrachi Alevi says. The Rambam doesn't address it. So maybe the Rambam actually would agree with this. We don't know. The Rambam, Zrachi Alevi tells us clearly. The Rambam learns the Brisa a different way, but maybe it doesn't change the fact that that's what the din is. And so therefore the Rivash concludes, tells this Yehuda, the answer is it's okay. It's okay if they leave Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, not okay. This is the tshuva of the Rivash, Shalos HaTshuva Simin Yud Zay. Now, in later generations, there were Rabbanim who took a look at this and disagreed, at least somewhat disagreed. Specifically, Rabbi Yosef ben Lev. He lived in the 1500s in the Ottoman Empire, and in his Shalos HaTshuva Chelek Beis Simin Nun Gimel, he kind of reduced the impact of this heter from the Rivash in a very significant way. And he says, even the Baal HaMaor, Rabbi Zrachi Alevi, did not say what Rivash thought he said if it's definite that you're going to have to be Mechal Shabbos. If it's Vadai, no. You can't leave on Sunday if you know for sure 100% that Shabbos I'm going to have to be Mechal Shabbos. Rather, what was Rabbi Zrachi Alevi talking about? B'davar shuhu safek, maybe even a safek kara levada. So, not a 50-50 safek, maybe a 90% chance that I'm going to have to be Mechal Shabbos. So your Rabbi Yosef ben Lev wants to say that when the Baal HaMaor told us to be Mechalek between Sunday, Monday, Tuesday versus Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, it wasn't about a 100% case that you're going to have to be Mechal Shabbos. It's about a 90% case that you're going to have to be Mechal Shabbos. That's when we say Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, no. That's a 90% chance you're going to have to be Mechal Shabbos. You can't do it. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, okay, it's number one, it's far enough from Shabbos. And number two, it's not a 100% case. It's on 100%. It's only a 90%. It doesn't work so well with the Lashon of Reb Zrachi Alevi. Look at the last line of Reb Zrachi Alevi. V'hu adin lahafesh b'midbaris l'chol makom sakana she'adam asid l'chalo b'yas haShabbos. So Reb Zrachi Alevi seems to be saying that the law applies to anywhere where it is inevitable that you're going to be Mechal Shabbos. Rabbi Yosef ben Lev wants to say it's not about cases, it doesn't cover cases where it's inevitable. It covers cases where it means karev levada. And then he says, in fact, let's go back to the Gemara. What's the Gemara talking about? It's talking about a svina, a boat, a ship. Even if the ship is run by Jews, and they are the sailors, and they are the oars people, and everything, they're doing all the work. At the end of the day, it's very possible there's a chance you go out to sea, depending on the wind conditions and the weather conditions and a whole bunch of other factors, there's a good chance you may reach a port and be able to rest there on Shabbos. Now maybe it's only a 5% chance, but at least you have that chance. And when that is the case, then Sunday, Monday, Tuesday is fine. But heicha deika chilul Shabbos bevadai, which is the case the Rivash was talking about. Because the case that Rivash was talking about, they're going through the Sahara. How are they not going to be Machal Shabbos? Give me a scenario where they're not going to be Machal Shabbos. There is no scenario. There's no way to, there's no shortcuts, there's no rest stops, they're going to have to do it 100%. So then, Afilu harazah, the razah is Reb Zrachi Alevi, b'chagoin hai, loy ka'amar, he didn't agree that in that type of case. And so therefore, if you came to him, Rabbi Yosef ben Lev, and you asked him a shaila, so what if I need to travel a long distance? In his day it was already the 1500s. You could already travel to the New World. You could already come to America. So how would you do it? It's vadai that you're going to have to be Machal Shabbos. His answer would be, you have to go on a ship that's run by non-Jews. If the ship is being run by non-Jews and the passengers, they're doing it for non-Jewish passengers, and you're a Yid that's going on it, so then there's no Isser. What Isser are you doing? So that would be the only way. But if the Yid is going to have to do himself an Issa D'Oraisa, his answer is, no, you're not. If it's Vadai, you're not allowed to do it, even on Sunday. Even on Sunday. So this is a qualification, a major qualification that Rabbi Yosef ben Lev introduces over here. He's disagreeing with the Rivash. Which is a big deal. But this is what he does, and as we're going to see, this machlokes is going to be very important for the topic that we want to get to tonight. Okay, now let's go to the Tzemach Tzedek, because the Tzemach Tzedek brings this machlokes. The Tzemach Tzedek brings the shita of the Rivash and brings the shita of Rabbi Yosef ben Lev. And why? Why does the Tzemach Tzedek bring this machlokes? What's the relevance of this machlokes? Well, as we're going to see, it's very, very relevant for a very timely issue that the Tzemach Tzedek had to deal with in his day. But before we see that, let's see some of the analysis that the Tzemach Tzedek does before we see how he sought to apply it. So one of the things the Tzemach Tzedek does is he wants to establish that even according to Rabbi Yosef ben Lev, who now told us that if it's vadai, that it's going to lead to Chilul Shabbos, you're not allowed to do it even starting from Sunday, the Tzemach Tzedek wants to reduce this chumrah. And how do you reduce this chumrah? You say that it's not an Isser D'Oraisa, it's Isser D'Rabbanan. So when Rabbi Yosef ben Lev told us that if it's Vadei Chilul Shabbos on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, any day of the week, you're not allowed to go, it was only talking about Isser D'Rabbanan, not Isser D'Oraisa, and as we're going to see, that's going to be very important for the Tzemach Tzedek to establish. How does the Tzemach Tzedek establish that we're dealing over here only with Isser D'Rabbanan? So for that, he brings us to the Gemara Gittin, Taf Mem Dalid, Amid Aleph. The Gemara is discussing over here a Jew who owns an Eved Knani. Now, an Eved Knani is chayiv in the vast majority of mitzvahs. Many mitzvahs an Eved Knani needs to do. And could you imagine if a Yid takes his Eved Knani and then sells him to a Gentile? So all of a sudden now, this Eved Knani is not going to be observing any mitzvahs. So that's not something we like. We don't like to see a reduction in mitzvahs. And so therefore the Mishnah says in Maseches Gittin that someone who does this, there's a knas. What's the knas? The Eved goes Yotze L'Cheres. This Eved now is Yotze L'Cheres. Now what that means is the Gemara clarifies on Daf Mandal Amar Aleph and says, which means me, I'm the seller, I own the Eved Knani, I need to go to the buyer, the non-Jewish buyer. I need to buy him back. And then he's Yotze L'Cheres, he goes free. And how much do I need to pay to buy him back? What if the guy doesn't want to sell him? Ad mea bedamav, even 100 times than the original purchase price. So this is a serious punishment that Chazal are putting on the seller. Don't sell your Eved Knani slave to a non-Jew. Now, when the Gemara is talking about this, it says multiple things, a long shakla atar in the Gemara. What we want to do is we want to point to two statements the Gemara makes about this din. Statement number one, D'chol yoma v'yoma mafkalei mitzvos. Here, what the Gemara is doing is saying how bad and how terrible this act is. And the reason the Gemara is doing this is because it's comparing it and contrasting it to other things that a person shouldn't do, and that's why it ends up making these statements. And one of the statements it says is that this is really bad because when you sell your Evet Knani to a non-Jew, every single day now, he's not doing mitzvahs. When he was under your ownership, every day he's doing mitzvahs. And now, that's how bad it is. At the same time, as the Gemara continues, the Gemara makes another statement. And the Gemara says, Hacha Isura Derabanan. That this thing of not selling your Evet Knani to a non-Jew is only Issa Derabanan, it's not Issa Deraisa. Now think about that. Here you have an Evet Knani. An Evet Knani is obligated to keep every single lois haseh. And even many mitzvahs haseh, this Evet Knani is obligated to observe. I sell him, and all of a sudden now he's not going to be able to do any of that. By definition, not going to be able to do any of that. And nonetheless, that act of the sale, what does the Gemara define it? It defines it as a Isser Derabana. And the Tzemach Tzedek picks up on this. And the Tzemach Tzedek says, Nik in Yeridea Simin Tzadik Beis, and today's shir is basically all about this simin, as we'll soon see what the topic is. The Tzemach Tzedek says, picks up on this Gemara and says, Nikra Raki Surah Darabanan. It's only called Issa Darabanan. Now, on the face of it, that sounds a little interesting because you're taking someone who min ha-Torah is chayiv in many, many mitzvahs. Min ha-Torah. Every kind is chayiv in all the mitzvahs. You did something that made him now not be able to keep it, and nonetheless, we're saying that's Issa Darabanan. The tzarech liyah is hatam. The reason is, once he's in the Gentile hands, when he's not going to be able to observe the mitzvahs because obviously his master is not going to let him. So that his refraining from any mitzvah, then let's say Shabbos, he's not going to keep Shabbos. So that's not a biblical isser. Im onus, who, if he's onus, and again the assumption is that his master is not going to let him keep Shabbos, and so therefore he's an onus. So if he's an onus, that's not a biblical violation. Ella. So at that moment, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing really wrong that happened. The Eved wakes up in the morning, says, "I want to keep Shabbos." His new non-Jewish master says, "No, I don't let you, and if you do, the consequences are severe." Okay, so nothing bad happened on that day. Nothing terrible happened on that day. Torah says, in the case of Oinus Rachmana Patre, finished. Ella shagoyrim lo yachshav lozeh. The problem is that you, the sale before Shabbos, when you sell him, that's causing it. Oh, so now you move into causation. Causation and halacha has its own rules, has its own halacha has its own way of thinking about the concept of causing something as opposed to the act itself. Gramazu eba isadaraisa. So when you make a grama, when you cause that later someone won't be able to do a mitzvah, so that act is not a biblical violation. Your cause is not a biblical violation, it's only a Isser Derabanan. And so therefore, the Tzemach Tzedek says, come back to our case over here. You go out on a caravan on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, or any day of the week for that matter. And it's for sure that you're going to be Mechal Shabbos. What did Rabbi Yosef ben Lev said? Rabbi Yosef ben Lev said that because it's for sure, so therefore it's Asr. If you're going to do Malacha, because it's for sure, it's Asr. What type of Isser we're dealing with here? When Shabbos comes, you're Oinus. It's B'koach Nefesh, so there's no problem there. The issue is your decision on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday during the week. So now, just like by the slave, that's like a grama. So the grama, that's only Issa Darabanan. So again, Rivash said it's mutter. It's mutter. Even if it's Vadai, Rivash said it's mutter. The more stringent position, Rabbi Yosef ben Lev said, it's Asr, says the Tzemach Tzedek, based on this Gemara in Gittin, the Isser is only Issa Darabanan and nothing more. Now why does the Tzemach Tzedek care? Why does that matter? So look what he says now. This is what we need. Nidain zeh, our case. And therefore, accordingly, says the Tzemach Tzedek, in our case, and here, what is the case? So the Tzemach Tzedek defines it with the following 4 words. Shemoicher es atzmoi la'avoidos. When you sell yourself, and la'avoidos is a very interesting term, when you sell yourself to, I guess you would translate as some sort of servitude. Okay, now the emes is that we have this tshuva of the Tzemach Tzedek in the Ksaviat Kodesh of the Tzemach Tzedek. It's in manuscript 1041, housed here in the library. And if you go there and you look up this tshuva, you'll see that it actually said la'avodas, and then had another word, and that other word is erased. The Tzemach Tzedek crossed it over. And obviously what's happening over here is the Tzemach Tzedek put that word there and then crossed it out is because of the sensitivities of what we're actually discussing, and that's why the Tzemach Tzedek was being vague. I can't tell 100% what the word is. It appears to me that the word he erased was hayishma'elim. I'm not 100% sure, but that's what it seems. That it said, someone who sells himself into avodas yishma'elim. Now obviously, we're not talking about any avodas yishma'elim, as we're going to see very clearly what we are talking about. But it appears to me that the Tzemach Tzedek used that word as kind of the cover for what this tshuva is going to be. Ultimately, for whatever reason, decided to take that word out. And so therefore, all it says is, shamoiches atzmai la'avodas, and the printers changing it to the word la'avodos. Okay. Anyway, so our case, so what do we know? Our case is someone who's selling himself into servitude. And what happens? Shalapam and muchrach lechal Shabbos v'yamtiv. And when you do this, when you sell yourself into this, sometimes you're going to be forced to mechal Shabbos v'yamtiv. So, in other words, this case is the same case as the Rivash, just like the Rivash's case. On Sunday and Monday, you made your journey, and it's inevitable you're going to be forced to mechal Shabbos. Here, the person who sells themselves into this avodas, they're going to sometimes, not all the time, sometimes, shalapamim. But it's inevitable that it's going to happen. It's not a suffix, it's a vada. According to the Rivash, so it's mutar lechatchila. There's no isser over here because it's distant from Shabbos. When the event is actually going to happen, we don't know when it's going to happen. And so, even though it's for sure going to happen, to the Rivash, it's not a shaila. To Rabbi Yosef ben Lev, there's an isser. Why? Because for sure going to happen. If it's for sure going to happen, then there's isser right now. But what did we just establish? It's only an isser derabanan. A isser derabanan. As long, one condition, as long as that when it happens, you're not doing the lav because you don't care. You're not doing it because you enjoy it. You're only going to do it because you're forced into it. So this is what the Tzemach Tzedek, why the Tzemach Tzedek brings the Rivash. This is why he brings Rabbi Yosef ben Lev. Obviously, what we want to know is what is he talking about? What is the case that he's dealing with over here? But the general thing we understand exactly what he is trying to do, what he's trying to say. He's trying to say that there's a problem over here with this act, according to Rabbi Yosef ben Lev, but guess what? It's only Issur D'Rabbanan. And why? What do you gain by saying Issur D'Rabbanan is still Issur? But the reason he's going in this direction is because Issur D'Rabbanan, we know very often, L'Tzorach Gadol, if there's a very, very great need, then sometimes we're matter Issur D'Rabbanan. And that's what the Tzemach Tzedek wants to do. And therefore, if you establish, according to the Rivash, it's not Issur, even Yosef ben Lev, it's only Issur D'Rabbanan. So if we have a Tzorach Gadol, so then maybe it's going to become mutter. However, before we actually talk about what exactly the Tzemach Tzedek is talking about, I want to do one more piece of where the Tzemach Tzedek is actually comparing it to the Gemara in Gittin, to the case of someone who sells their Gentile slave. Because as it's the Eved Knani, to a Gentile. And what the Tzemach Tzedek wants to do over here, it seems to be, is to say, actually when you learn that sugya really well, it seems less like Rabbi Yosef ben Lev is correct. Rabbi Yosef ben Lev said that if it's inevitable that there's going to be Issur D'Oraisa down the road, so then now it's Issur D'Rabbanan. Maybe from the Gemara in Gittin, this is less clear. Why? The Gemara in Gittin, when it deals with this issue of selling your Eved Knani, so we have Rav Yirmiyah. Rav Yirmiyah is very famous in the Gemara, who asks hair-splitting questions that often don't get answered, and that happens over here in this sugya as well. By Rav Yirmiyah, the Gemara in Gittin Daf Amud Aleph asks, Rav Yirmiyah asks the question, what happens if someone sells his Eved Knani for 30 days? So on the one hand, for 30 days, he's not going to be observing mitzvahs. On the other hand, it's only 30 days. So, is it usher? And did the Rabbanan say that you have to buy him back now and that he's Yetzel Acheres? Does that whole package apply or does it not apply? The Gemara, Rav Yirmiyah continues to ask a few other questions. One of them was, Chutz min ha-mitzvahs mahu. What happens if you sell the Eved Knani to a Gentile and you say, you have full jurisdiction over him, but not for mitzvahs. In other words, for mitzvahs, he still has to observe mitzvahs. So on the one hand, you sold him to a non-Jew. On the other hand, he now still has the right to observe mitzvahs. So, does the Isser apply and the whole thing of Yoitza Lecherus and you have to buy him back, Ad Mea B'Damav, does all that apply or does it not apply? What does the Gemara do? It does not answer the questions. It does not answer the questions. And therefore, if you look at the Rambam, the Shulchan Aruch, what they paskin here is Lekula. Especially once you understand that we're dealing here with only a Issa D'Rabbanan. So, Issa D'Rabbanan, you're going to go Lekula, so it goes Lekula. Says it Tzemach Tzedek. So in these cases, we're not even sure there's an Issa. We're not even sure if it's Machra L'Shloshim Yoim, we're not even sure if it's an Isser. If it's Machra Chutz Min HaMitzvos, we're not even sure if there's an Isser. We're not even sure if there's an Isser D'Rabbanan, we're not even sure in these two cases. Says Tzemach Tzedek, that's similar to our case. Our case, the Nidei Didan that we're dealing with, is similar to Chutz Min HaMitzvos. Why is it similar to Chutz Min HaMitzvos? Because in this case, the people who are selling themselves, they're allowed to keep Torah. It's only once in a while that they're going to have to end up violating Shabbos or some other thing. So largely speaking, this case is much more similar to someone who is able, and the Eved Knani who is able to keep Kol HaMitzvahs. Okay, the Tanai is able to keep all the mitzvahs. Here, you're able to keep most of the mitzvahs, but still, there's a shaila over there. We're not even sure if there's Issa D'Rabbanan. So the same should be over here, because you're able to keep the majority of the mitzvahs most of the time. It's only sometimes you get withheld from doing some of the mitzvahs. So therefore, based on that Gemara, we don't even know if there's Issa D'Rabbanan. So come back to Rabbi Yosef ben Lev and say, I don't know if you're so right that there's Issa D'Rabbanan over here. And then he says one more thing. He says, in fact, we could also compare it to the case of Machar L'Shloshim Yoim. Machar L'Shloshim Yoim is also a case where we're not sure if there's Issa D'Rabbanan. Says at Tzemach Tzedek, Af shekan shonim rabbis. Even though here we're dealing not with 30 days, we're dealing with many, many years. Our case over here where the person is selling himself is 30 years. Makol mokoim, it's still not indefinite. It's not forever. And he's been signed here to the Shulchan Aruch. And when the Shulchan Aruch brings this issue, it doesn't say Machar L'Shloshim Yom. It says Machar L'Zman. Machar L'Zman. In other words, the Shulchan Aruch doesn't care about 30 days. The key question is, if it's not forever, what is it then? And once it's not forever, the Gemara is not sure there's an Isser. So says the Tzemach Tzedek, our case over here, even though it's many years, but at the end of the day, it's not forever. So based on that Gemara, it's not so clear that there's going to be Issa D'Rabbanan. So come back to Rabbi Yosef ben Lev and say, you said there's Issa D'Rabbanan. If you do an act now, that's going to cause you later to have Chilul Shabbos, and he's saying it's Issa D'Rabbanan, but based on this Gemara and Gittin, it's not so clear, because we're not even sure there's Issa D'Rabbanan in this type of case. Okay, so now the bottom line is that already here, from this Talmudic analysis that the Tzemach Tzedek does, you're able to put together the pieces of what he's talking about. He's talking about someone who's selling themselves. He calls it la'avodas. Okay? He tells us that you're able in general to observe Judaism, but sometimes you're going to be mukhrach l'chal Shabbos v'Yom Tov. And he tells us it's laharbe shanim. That's the historical information that's embedded in this analysis. So what is this tshuva about? And for that, let's take a turn and talk about the following book. The following book, authored by a man named Yosef Mendelevitz, a historian, is about, and it's the title of this book, it came out in 2010. It's written in Hebrew. It's called HaCantonistim. And all the historical information that I'm going to give you now, which you can probably get in many different places, but all of it I collected from this volume. August 26th, 1827, the Czar Nicholas I said we're changing the policy for Jews in the military in Russia. Up until that point, the Jews paid a tax, and it was, we're paying this tax so that we don't go to the military. And now the Tsar says no more of that tax. Now there's going to be a compulsory military service on Jews. In the beginning, meaning in 1827, the numbers were 4 Jews for every 1,000 Jews. Later, in the 1850s, it rose to 10 Jews for every 1,000 Jews. Now, there's many documents that survive from this period, and Mendelevich publishes many of these documents in this book. So the original law, the way it was published in 1827, states the following. Service for Jews is from 12 years old till 25 years old. However, if you're going to be less than 18, so then you can't serve in the military younger than 18 years old. So then you're going to end up going to a military academy that was designed for children. Russian children were in these schools. They were called cantons. Canton means district. That's because every district had its own school for little children who were going to grow into a military career, hence the term Cantonists. So strictly speaking, Cantonists would only apply to the Jewish soldiers who are taken between the ages 12 and 18. If someone was 18 and up, they would just go straight to a regular military regiment or whatever. The service would be for 25 years, starting from 18. So if a kid was taken at 12, doesn't matter, the clock starts ticking at age 18 of actual service. What was the purpose of these? Why did they want to do this? So the evidence suggests that one of the key things was to reduce the fertility rate amongst Jews. The Russians were very concerned about the Jews' high birth rate. And they figured if you take men away and you put them in the military during these years that they normally marry and have children, so that would be one way to reduce the Jewish population. Another thing that the Russians wanted was they thought this would be a way to help assimilate the Jews into Russian culture. I think you see that all the time, that when people join militaries, that's a great way to feel more in tune with that country's culture and its nationalist spirit. And by definition, that would mean Jews being more Russian, and hopefully that means less Jewish as well. There was definitely thought that there would be some Jews who, due to assimilationist tendencies, would end up converting to Christianity, and obviously that was something that they desired as well. Okay, how are these people going, the 4 Jews, how are they going to be selected? So in this original document from 1827, it says that the Jewish community, they have the responsibility of selecting the 4 people, and it gave them, the Jewish community, the authority that they could hand over the no-goodniks. Who are the no-goodniks? The Jews who failed to pay their taxes, the Jews who were illegal, they were just floating around, but they weren't documented, or people who cause a public nuisance, or whatever. Every society has those, so they can be the people who you hand over. And it stands to reason that maybe communities originally would have wanted to do that. The problem is, how many in your community do you have? I mean, after a year or two, you're going to run out of the supply of those people. The legislation said, the Tsar's document, again from 1827, says, the Jewish soldier will be allowed religious liberty. He will be allowed to keep his religion. He'll be allowed to visit a shul, and they'll be allowed to gather on the military base in order to do religious services if there is no shul locally. In 1831, there is a document from that year that has a very, very clear rules about Shabbos and Yom Tov. It says Jews generally are allowed to observe Shabbos and Yom Tov in the military. Of course, not during times of war, but also if they're on guard. Not during war, but if they're on guard, so then they're going to have to do that even on Shabbos and Yom Tov. If there's a military exercise or something like that, or some sort of training, and it's on Shabbos, they're going to have to do that. But other than that, the Jews are allowed to observe Shabbos and Yom Tov. In the book, he documents different cases that you're able to see how there was permission for Yidden to observe their religion while in the military. So, for example, he has documents about bringing matzah to Kronstadt. Kronstadt was this military base that's right outside Petersburg in 1828. He has a document in 1829 bringing matzah to Jewish soldiers in Smolensk. And in 1832, allowing Jews to eat kosher Pesach food while in the military. When it came to the Cantonists, that is the children, already in 1829, so that's 2 years into the decree, they're able to tell the Tsar giving directions that they should attempt to Christianize, meaning to convert, to baptize these children. Remember, they're under 18 years old. It's between 12 and 18. In some cases, the community sent people under 12 as well, and so much easier to convince someone of that age to convert. And already in 1829, 2 years after, we find documents supporting the idea that this was an official policy to try to get this done. And in fact, there were cases already in 1829, unfortunately, of such conversion. Later on, in the 1840s, the situation became much worse. Number one, anti-Jewish discrimination in general in the military. So for example, in the Tsar's private security service, there were Russian soldiers who were Jewish. And the Tsar in 1843 was like, no, I don't want any Jews there. So, and obviously what that would mean is, persecution and discrimination against Jews throughout the military. And in 1851 actually said, I don't want rabbis involved, meaning there were times that there were chaplains, Jewish chaplains that were paid by the military. In 1851 he said, no, we don't want this anymore, let's get rid of it. Also for the Cantonists, for the children, there was a turn for the worse in the 1840s. There's documents from 1843 where the Tsar says, we've been having this program, it's been going on since 1827, now it's already 1843, so it's a good 15 years later, and we don't have enough kids who were converted to Christianity, and as a result, one of the things is someone wrote back, yeah, well, these kids are going to shul, so why are they going to convert? They have support from the local communities. And so in 1845, the Tsar said, children are no longer, the Cantonists, the young children are no longer allowed to leave the base to go to a shul, even as they're allowed to continue officially observing Yiddishkeit on their local base, on their base. Now in the documents, going back to the documents from 1827, it says that the community, there's going to be turns, there's going to be some sort of system that the community uses, and a certain family is going to be selected and they have to hand over their child, right? So if a certain family has a turn, and it's their turn, they are allowed to propose someone to take their place, a substitute, as long as the substitute is doing it from their own free will. Now the Russians understood by making this rule, by definition, why would a substitute agree? The substitute would agree if he's being paid. It didn't say that clearly, but I think everyone understood that. And in this book, he brings from different Russian writers a few different stories about Cantonists, and there are two of them that touch on the issue of people paying for someone else to go in their place. So here's a summary of these two stories. First comes from a Russian writer, his name is Nikolai Laskov. He says that in 1852, he worked for the governor's office in Kiev. And one day, he is approached by a Jew who says he's a bookbinder and that he's a free-thinking type of Jew, and so the community isn't so thrilled with his deis. The Kehillah took his 10-year-old son, and they're going to send him off to the military. The father says he found, it was his obligation to find a replacement, and he did. He found someone for 700 ruble. Now he says he sold his house for 330 ruble. So that gives you a little bit of a picture of how large of a sum. And remember, if we're dealing with 25 years of military service, you could understand it's going to be an astronomical sum. So he says he found someone for 700 ruble. He sold his house for 330 ruble. He borrowed the rest of the money. He gave it to the guy. The guy then runs away and goes to a monastery. Now, by going to a monastery, he says, I want to convert to Christianity. That, in and of itself, the Tsar policy would be, now you don't have to go to the military because the Tsar wanted a conversion. So Laskov says that he went to the head of the monastery and said, this guy is fooling you, he doesn't really want to convert, hand him over. And so they handed him over and they sent him to the military. But what you see in this story is, there is the concept of a replacement, but it becomes the family's obligation. It's not the community's obligation. The community grabbed the kid and then they said, you want to find a replacement? Go ahead and bring a replacement, which is what the Tzemach Tzedek was talking about. A second story that we have is by an author, S. Balin, and he is from Novardok. And he says over there that the community, the Jewish community, went around and took young, he doesn't say children, he says the whole time he uses young adults, the language of Bacharim, young adults, and be'ikr, it's the people who are the problems in the communities. He says it was the people who behaved lewdly and those who were the drunkards and all those, and they held them in the Kehillah house. And during their stay there, they fed them great foods, and there was a whole, they tried convincing them that they should agree to go to the military for significant amount of money. So here it's the Kehillah asking people to take money in order to go to the military, and most of them, he says, actually agreed. He said there were some who disagreed and didn't want, and it's a little vague what happened at the end over there, but some of them agreed. So what you have in this story here is the community doing the purchase, but not in the way you may have thought. You may have thought is that they put up a sign that says, who wants to come forth for money? No, what they did is they kidnap people, and then once they have them, then they start working on them and convince them to consent. So with this historical background, we can understand what's going on in the Tshuva of the Tzemach Tzedek. The Tzemach Tzedek talks about the fact that people have the ability to buy replacements. Well, we see that the law allowed it, and the stories that we have that survive talk about this. So Tzemach Tzedek spoke about the fact that you're able to observe Judaism in the military. That's something that the historical record reflects as well. The Tzemach Tzedek also spoke about the fact that it's inevitable that you're going to have to do some Isurim, like Shabbos and Yom Tov, and that also is clear from the record that it was said very clearly that if there's an exercise or some sort of shmira is necessary, you're going to have to do it. It's very hard to imagine that over a 25-year stint that isn't going to happen at least sometimes, and so therefore the concept of yuchrach lavar, that by definition you're going to have to do it, and again, then it's a oinus, because you're not going to do it, your commander is going to obviously punish the soldier severely, then it's a oinus. Fine, so that leads to the question, are you allowed to sell yourself to that? That's a halachic question. Are you allowed to sell yourself into a situation where you know that down the line it's inevitable that you're going to end up being Chal Shabbos? The Tzemach Tzedek spoke about the fact that it's more than Shloshim Yoim. It's Harbe Zman. Right, we know, it's 25 years. Now, what's the din? According to the Rivash, it's mutter. If Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, you're allowed to start on a journey even knowing 100% that you can be Chal Shabbos, so then sell yourself into the military, even though you know 100% at some point you're going to be an oinus, so you're going to have to be Chal Shabbos. According to the Rivash, there's no shaila. Even according to Rabbi Yosef ben Lev, who said that if it's Vadai, then it's Taka Aser. What did the Tzemach Tzedek accomplish? He accomplished Issa Darabanan. And although he doesn't say it clearly, what he seems to be saying is, and so if it's Issa Darabanan, then what? Then we could be mater l'tzayra gadol. And now it's a real tzayra gadol. We need this type of thing. It's not a regular type of case. And so therefore, maybe it would be okay for us to do this because of the great need. I should point out that the Tzemach Tzedek is very clear in his tshuva. In parts that we already read, it already begins, but it becomes stronger later on in the tshuva. All of this is only if the person is selling himself meritzaynai hatoiv. He actually uses those two words, meritzaynai hatoiv, later on in the tshuva. Not where the person is forced into it. In the second story, where the people are kidnapped and then being convinced to sell themselves, that's not what the Tzemach Tzedek was talking about. And it's possible that the community wanted to follow the psak of the Tzemach Tzedek, but they had a very, very hard time. So they could have just thrown it out, as some communities did, and just kidnapped some people and hand them over. This community seemed to want to also do it in a way that is mutter the way that Tzemach Tzedek spoke about it. Maybe other Rabbanim gave such piskei dinim as well. I should point out that from this whole period, the late 20s, the 30s, the 40s, I'm not familiar with any tshuvas from any Rabbanim in Russia. All the material that we saw in the previous class that we did was all in the context of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. From Russia, this is the only tshuva that I am aware of. So it could be, coming back to my point, it could be that this community was like, okay, really, it's supposed to be, you're not supposed to force people. Really, you need to buy it. Okay, but we're not getting sellers, so let's do a hybrid where we force and then we sell. It could be that's the history that happened over there. But in terms of forcing people and kidnapping people, that's something that Tzemach Tzedek is clear in this tshuva that is off the table. And in fact, is in the Chabad sources, we have a few versions of a story that convey this point very clearly. I'm going to read from the version from Rabbi Yehuda Chitrik in Rishimis Dvarim, Volume 3, where he says the following story. There were two chappers, and that is people who work for the community to take people by force and to hand them over to the military. They came to the Tzemach Tzedek and they said that they have a monetary dispute. They both got paid for this work. The community paid them to do this work, and it was a question of how they should divide the funds. So they said, now typically what happens in a din Torah is you say, you want a din Torah, you want a pshara. So they went out of their way to say, we want din Torah, we don't want a pshara. Tell me who's right, who's wrong. So the Tzemach Tzedek said, you want a din Torah? They said, yeah, only the din, not a pshara. So the Tzemach Tzedek opened the Chumash to Parshas Mishpatim, where it says, "V'goynev ishum charoi mois yumas," and he said he read that pasuk. If you kidnap someone and you sell him for monetary gain, which is essentially what these people did. They kidnapped someone for monetary gain, mois yumas, and the story concludes that both of these people, in fact, didn't live for more than a year. Okay, now all of this is only one issue. The Tzemach Tzedek here only dealt with one issue, and the fact is that this is much more complicated. The one issue that we dealt with is that lepamim, you're going to be mukhrach to be mechal Shabbos and Yom Tov. But the truth is, sending someone to the military or buying from someone or purchasing from someone and thereby sending him as a replacement to the military is much more complicated. And the tshuva that Tzemach Tzedek goes on to raise other issues. So what are these other issues? So the next part is very, very cryptic in the Tzemach Tzedek. B'chlal, the whole tshuva is cryptic, written cryptically. And yesh la'ayin, with this tshuva, was it written, in fact, for someone else to read? And therefore it's written cryptically because the person is a great Talmud Chacham and a Rav, and therefore not everything needs to be spelled out. And also possibly maybe because of the Russian eyes, maybe that's why it's written cryptically. Or maybe the Tzemach Tzedek wrote it for himself, which we know the Tzemach Tzedek sometimes did that. So I don't know. But the bottom line is it's written very, very cryptically. How much more so the next part about Kabbalah. So I'm going to tell you what I think the Tzemach Tzedek is saying over here in the next part. As much as we discussed the issue of the potential Chilul Shabbos is a whole other issue. What's the issue? The issue is causing for oneself physical pain. When you sign up for the military, you're signing up for physical pain. I'm not talking about the sakonas nefashos if there's a battle. Interestingly, the Tzemach Tzedek doesn't get into that. But pashut the pain that a soldier has, whether it's because your commander is going to whip you, or whether the exercise regimen, or whatever it is. He doesn't get into the specifics. So he says like this. This is not going to be a problem. And to understand why, let's back up. There is an Isser Chabala. There's an Isser Chabala, where a person is not allowed to wound themselves. And when you look at the Alter Rebbe and Shulchan Aruch, the Alter Rebbe pairs that Isser together with, you're not allowed to cause yourself pain. And there's a reason the Alter Rebbe does that. Because if you go to the Gemara in Baba Kama, it actually says as a machloikas, is a person allowed to self-wound or not? It's two shittas. One shitta says you're allowed to self-wound. Hashem gave you the right. Doesn't mean it's smart, but Hashem gave you the right. Another view says you're not allowed to self-wound. The Gemara, when it discusses, it says, who is the view that says you're not allowed to self-wound? So it brings a drasha from one of the Tanoim, who spoke about the fact that a Nazir, it's not so good that a Nazir became a Nazir. In fact, a Nazir needs atonement. Why? What did he do wrong? Because he caused himself pain. Now, did the Nazir wound himself? No, the Nazir didn't wound himself. He just refrained from having wine. And nonetheless, it calls that pain. So what do you see? The Gemara is clearly linking the prohibition to wound with the concept of causing even emotional distress. So what you see from that Gemara, that's what the Alter Rebbe does this. The Alter Rebbe says, Asur l'adam lachbo ba'atzmai, and a person, you're not allowed to be mitzara yourself. Oh, so that's the problem over here. The problem over here is, by going to the military, you're causing yourself pain. So what's the answer? So the Tzemach Tzedek says, go back to the Gemara, and as we already know, it's a machloikas. There's another view that holds you're allowed to be chayvo ba'atzmai, even though we don't paskin that way la'alacha. Fine. But at the end of the day, when you're going to the military, there's not Kabbalah mamash. It's not like you're causing wounds to your body. It's only the pain, which is less of an issue. So if the pain is less of an issue, here we can rely on the shitta that says you're allowed to be chayvo ba'atzmai. That's essentially what he's saying. So if it were real Kabbalah, we would say, oh, the Gemara paskins, you're now be chayvo ba'atzmai. But because it's not Kabbalah mamish, it's only pain, so we already have a view that says that b'chlal Kabbalah you're allowed to do. So I'll rely on that. If not for Kabbalah, I'll rely on that for pain. And so therefore the Tzemach Tzedek very cryptically says this is not an issue. The person could go ahead and he can sell himself for this issue. And nonetheless, we're still not done. Why are we not done? Because the Tzemach Tzedek now says we have to be worried about a whole nother issue. A whole nother issue. I spoke about before the fact that going to the military could lead very easily to assimilation, could lead very easily to conversion. We didn't talk about that till now. In our halachic analysis until now, we said that maybe there's going to be Chilul Shabbos, or maybe there's Chavala. But hold on a second. There's much bigger concerns. That when someone goes to the military, maybe they drop Yiddishkeit. Or maybe they choose another religion. And now the Tzemach Tzedek says, we have to deal with that. The Gemara in Sanhedrin, Daf Tzaddik Hey Amud Aleph, says the following. It has a conversation with the Eibishter and David HaMelech. And the Eibishter says, you have a sin embedded within you. He tells David HaMelech. What's the sin embedded within you? Because of the story of Noiv Ir HaKoyanim. The story of Noiv Ir HaKoyanim is as follows in brief. David HaMelech has a falling out with Shaul. Shaul wants to kill David. David HaMelech runs away. He comes to Noiv, that's where the Mishkan is at the time. And he comes to Achimelech. Achimelech knows him as the king's son-in-law. So Achimelech says, how can I help you? He says, yeah, I need a sword and some bread. So Achimelech gives him the sword and the bread. Now Doeg HaDoimi sees this, reports it to Shaul. And now Achimelech is accused of aiding the enemy. And so Achimelech and many of the Koyanim of Noiv were killed. So here Hashem turns to David HaMelech and Hashem says, Noiv Ir HaKoyanim was killed because of you. Because you're the one who asked them for the sword and the bread. And Doeg HaDoimi was punished because he's the one who conveyed the information to Shaul. He was punished, that's also because of you. And then Shaul was punished because of this act, and that's also because of you. So all of this is because of you. Here you have a choice. Either you're punished, or your children are going to be punished. Which do you want? So you see clearly from this Gemara, the concept that you do something, and it caused problems by someone else, and we blame who? We blame you for what you did. Says the Tzemach Tzedek, Hachanami, Ze Efsher Ligroim Sheyaver Alavedes Chamuris. Buying from someone, purchasing a replacement, it is possible he's going to do Averes Chamuris. The Tzemach Tzedek does not mean over here the Chilul Shabbos issue that we spoke about before. His language changed. Now he's talking about Averes Chamuris. Averes Chamuris, by definition, means something you're not allowed to do. The Chilul Shabbos, you're allowed to do it. That's not a problem. We already dealt with that. The issue is that maybe you're going to do Averes Chamuris, and later he's going to use the language Bishat Nefesh. And he's going to use other language that makes it very clear. Here, what are we talking about? We're talking about the threat of assimilation. We're talking about the threat of throwing away Torah mitzvahs. We're talking about the threat of perhaps even conversion. And the truth is that Abayim from day one always knew, everyone from day one knew that military service included these threats. Where do we see that? 2 places. Number 1, there's a letter from the Mittel Rebbe to Rav Moshe Meislish right after the Alter Rebbe passed away, a long letter where the Mittel Rebbe reports all the things that happened when the Alter Rebbe was running away from Napoleon. Very, very important document, this letter. One of the things that the Mittel Rebbe writes to Rav Moshe Meislish is that the Alter Rebbe, before he passed away, said that Judaism will only survive under the Tsar, as opposed to under Napoleon. The Tsar then, at the time, was Alexander I. Why? Because he's maimin ba'achtas Hashem, he believes in achtas Hashem, which is a very interesting statement to be said about a Christian, but that's not our topic right now. He's maimin ba'achtas Hashem, and he wants Judaism to be strong. The Alter Rebbe is saying Alexander I wants Judaism to be strong. Definitely he doesn't want to move them away from Yiddishkeit. And the Mittel Rebbe then quotes the Alter Rebbe as having said, Al kain ein retzoynoi b'shum oifen b'nekrutin. Nekrutin is recruiting. He doesn't want recruits. He doesn't want military recruits. In other words, we're talking that this whole military project started when? In 1827. Already from the early 1800s in the Russian court, there were constant conversations about drafting the Jews. And the Alter Rebbe here is saying that Alexander I was against it. Why was he against it? Because he doesn't want to hurt Yiddishkeit. In other words, Alexander understood, the Alter Rebbe understood, the Mittel Rebbe understood, everyone understood that military recruits will hurt Yiddishkeit. In what way? A random Chilul Shabbos due to a military exercise? No. What's going to hurt Yiddishkeit is the points we spoke about before, the assimilation and all of that. So this was widely understood. And also, in the previous class where we spoke about the Austro-Hungarian situation, we concluded by talking briefly about the Cantonists, and we quoted then the Maimer of the Mittel Rebbe that he said a few weeks before he passed away, and in that Maimer, the Mittel Rebbe spoke about Lahavin Inyan, why you have someone who, when he's in the Jewish community, he doesn't convert, but then when he gets taken out and he goes to the military, he converts. So you see already, right in the beginning, the Mittel Rebbe already was talking about the concept of conversion. So this is what the Tzemach Tzedek means over here. Even if we put aside the occasional oinus for Chilul Shabbos and the issue of Chavala, we now move on to another issue. This is only a maybe. This is not for sure. This is only a maybe. Maybe it will happen. Maybe it will happen that the person will either assimilate or throw away vast, significant parts of Yiddishkeit, or, God forbid, convert. So how are we supposed to deal with that? Maybe that makes it usher for you now to go ahead and purchase that person's services. So the Tzemach Tzedek says, no, we have a tshuva, we have a precedent to actually not that this shouldn't be a problem. I, the Gemara in Sanhedrin, it's because of you. You're going to be blamed. David HaMelech is blamed for the consequences. You're going to be blamed for the assimilation and all that's going to happen. No, don't be worried about that Gemara. Where do we get that? Why? So for that, the Tzemach Tzedek takes us back to the other Tzemach Tzedek. So who's the other Tzemach Tzedek? In the 1600s, there's the first Tzemach Tzedek. He's the first one to name a Sefer Tzemach Tzedek. His name was Menachem Mendel as well. Menachem Mendel is the Gematria of Tzemach Tzedek. His name was Menachem Mendel. Menachem Mendel Krachmal. He passed away in 1661. He was a rabbi in Moravia. In Nikolsburg was the name of the town. And in Shalos Teshuvos Tzemach Tzedek Siman Vav, he says the following case, which I'll summarize. There was a story of someone who sent a colleague on a mission, and he paid him. And in fact, he gave him some of the money up front. And it involved travel. So the shliach went on his way, and he had to cross some sort of makeshift bridge. It's described over here as planks that are on the water, and that's how people cross. But he slipped and fell into the water, and he drowned. And so now the question came to my yeshiva. The person came to my yeshiva. The case came before my yeshiva, and the question was, does the Mishaleach need a kapara? Does the Mishaleach need a kapara for causing this accidental death? Because he's the one who sent the shlichus. So they brought the question to Rabbi Menachem Mendel Krachmal, and he says, here is the answer that I gave them. We have precedent for this. What's the precedent? We go back to the 1400s, and one of the Rabbanim in Ashkenaz, his name was Rabbi Yaakov Weil. And Rabbi Yaakov Weil has a tshuva in Siman Kuf Chav Hei, where it deals with a very similar case. There's a person who sent Reb Ezra on the road on a certain shlichus. Reb Ezra, he calls him Hey Yod Dalet Hashem in Kondama, which means he was killed by Gentiles. Says Rabbi Yaakov Weil, he quotes the Gemara in Sanhedrin. He quotes, David HaMelech, it happened because of you, so therefore you need a kapara. It says the same thing over here. Because this individual sent Reb Ezra, and that's what led to his death, so therefore the sender needs a kapara. He should fast for 40 days. And he should also give money to Reb Ezra's surviving descendants. If they're young, he should give some money, Pasha, to pay for their bills, because he took away their bread winner, the wage earner of the family. So therefore, the Tzemach Tzedek says, based on that, he says a very interesting thing. When there was a Shas Chayrim, I don't know exactly what it means, but some sort of emergency, I wouldn't send a shliach. Because I don't know if it means bad weather, or if it means sending a Jew to, let's say, for some diplomatic mission that maybe could be dangerous. I didn't do it. And in fact, I sent other people, you're not allowed to. Why? Because Rabbi Yaakov Weil said that if something goes wrong, who needs kapara? You need kapara. But at the same time, it didn't work. They didn't listen to me, and they would send shluchim in these cases too. Okay, so where is he holding right now in his tshuva? He's taking this Gemara and Sanhedrin very, very seriously. You have good intentions, and you paid someone, and it's a nice thing that you did. At the end of the day, if the guy died, it's on you. Continues this Tzemach Tzedek, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Krachmal, and says, as much as Rabbi Yaakov Weil said that, maybe he's not so right. Why is maybe not so right? He brings the Gemara in Baba Metzia. The Gemara in Baba Metzia, when it talks about an employee and the need to pay the employee on time, Baba Metzia Daf Kuf Yud Beis Amud Aleph, it quotes a pasuk in Sefer Dvarim where it says, pay your employee on time because Elavu Noises Nafshoy. What does it mean, Ve'elavu Noises Nafshoy? So the way Chazal darshan it is that Ve'elav, for the money, who Noises Nafshoy, he's risking his life. What does it mean he's risking his life? Yeah, because he goes up on a ramp for some construction project, or he's hanging himself up by a tree, he's climbing up a tree to pick some fruit or whatever it is. The common denominator, these are dangerous things. And so therefore you better pay the guy on time, he's risking his life for the money. What do you see from the Gemara? The Gemara nems bepashtos that people are going to get money to do risky things. Is the Gemara therefore see it as as something that is irresponsible by the sender? It's not irresponsible by the sender. This is the normal way the world operates. You pay someone money, and part of the payment is for the risk that they end up taking. Says this Tzemach Tzedek, it sounds to me like it's a normal thing that you pay someone and he takes some risk. And when he signed up for the job, he knows that that's the case. And so why should it be your fault? And then he says, if it's really the case that it's your fault, you should basically never A frum Yid should never hire another Jew to do anything dangerous. Just like we're machmir about many things, just in case, right? So a Yid should never hire another Jew to be his balagala, because horse and buggy accidents happen as malazman. We never find that. We never even find that churba. We never find anyone being careful about this. Why? Because of this reason. You're paying the guy. It's part of the risk. It's not on you. It's on him. What about the case of David HaMelech? David HaMelech very clearly was being blamed for action taken by other people and harm that came. It's not his fault. Says the Tzemach Tzedek, yes, it was his fault. David HaMelech should have known that his act, going to Achimelech and doing that, was a dangerous thing, so its taka was on him. But in a regular case, where you're not doing anything irresponsible, you just hired a guy. Did you do anything wrong in hiring a guy? David HaMelech did something wrong. You shouldn't have asked him for a sword and for bread. But here, you're doing anything wrong when you say, I'm giving you $100, go on a horse and buggy to another town. You didn't do anything wrong. And so therefore he says, my analysis is lahalacha, that actually the Mishaleach doesn't need a kapara. But then he concludes with the hesitation. I'm living in the 1600s. Rabbi Yaakov Weil lived 200 years before me. And many other poskim followed him. So I'm comfortable to say I'm correct, lahalacha, but not lamaisa. And therefore, lamaisa, in his case, he told this guy he needs a kapara, even though his analysis led in a different direction. He's essentially suspending his analysis for the precedent of the prior Rabbanim. Says the Tzemach Tzedek does something very interesting here. Our Tzemach Tzedek, the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek says, let's bring all this onto the table over here. What are we worried about? We're worried about that you're going to do military, you're going to hire a guy for the military, and what's going to happen? What's going to happen is that he's going to end up, his connection to Torah mitzvahs is going to be weakened, so it's al yodcha, it's because of you. No, well, it's not because of me. I'm paying the guy. And the Tzemach Tzedek said that you're paying the guy, it's on him. I'm not doing anything irresponsible. I'm paying someone and it's on him. He's doing it. The Tzemach Tzedek himself said he doesn't want to rely on it. Lamaisa, fine, but lahalacha. He said it lahalacha even if not lamaisa. And so the Tzemach Tzedek is using that to maybe say, you don't have to worry about the fact that the guy may drop Torah mitzvahs, because at the end of the day you gave him money, it's on him if it happens, not on you. However, Tzemach Tzedek rejects this. Look at number 22. Ach, yesh lachalek ben hanoisim, the avoin chamor tfei. No, there's a difference here. It's one thing if you cause a guy to die, physically. Causing someone to be severed from Yiddishkeit is worse. And he quotes a Rashi, where Rashi says that someone who causes someone to sin is worse than killing the person. Because killing the person is only an Olam Hazeh, but causing them to sin, you remove them both from Olam Hazeh and from Olam Haba. So therefore, even if the Tzemach Tzedek is right for bodily death, and he was materid in the sense that it's not your fault if you cause it, maybe we won't say that if it's for soul death. Maybe then we will say it's your fault. Later on in the Tshuva, the Tzemach Tzedek says another difference. It's a normal thing to hire a laborer. So it's minhagei shalaylam. So that's fine. It's normal. It's not. But here, it's a normal thing to hire someone to go to the military for 25 years when there's a chance that maybe he's going to drop Torah mitzvahs. That's not minhagei shalaylam. And so that's another reason to say, I don't know if we could rely on this Tzemach Tzedek. So we're back to our problem. What's the problem? Al yadcha nitrad. We turn to David HaMelech and we say, it happened through you. And so if you buy the services of a replacement and then something happens to him, it's your problem, and so maybe this should get in the way right now. That's what we're holding right now. Continues the Tzemach Tzedek and says, Ochein yesh loymar. Here we come to key lines in the Tshuva. He says, Kiven mimanavshach muchrach echad likach avodah zu. Because at the end of the day, however this thing shakes up, someone has to do it. We need to send 4 people. There are 4 people for every 1,000 that need to go. So im kain rashai liskar b'charikoy, you're allowed to hire a replacement meritzoyne hatoiv. You're allowed to hire another replacement meritzoyne hatoiv if he wants. Why? Kivin she'enach shash rak meshum shema yetzel atarbas. I'm only worried that maybe something is going to happen. So that maybe could happen to anyone. It can happen to anyone that goes to the military. That worry applies equally to anyone. And this guy is willing to be your replacement. So why are you going to answer it? You're going to answer it because al yodcha, that it's going to happen? Yeah, but if you go, it may happen to you. So that's not a reason not to do it for him. So the lashon of the Tzemach Tzedek is meheicha teisei lio aser. Where do you have an isser here? You can't say this isser. Someone needs to go. The threat is pretty much equal the same, although a person could make an argument and say the people who were willing to sell themselves for it, maybe there's a stronger chash that they would be nichshol. Okay, Tzemach Tzedek does not accept that argument, does not say that argument. The chash is the same for everyone, so by what basis are you going to answer this? And that's how but he goes on to say, if you don't have this maman of shech, meaning if it's not a case where someone for sure needs to go, I don't know exactly what the historical circumstance would be of where they would want to send someone if it wasn't for sure that someone needs to go. But this is what he says, if you don't have the maman of shech that someone for sure needs to go, it's only that you're worried that maybe you're going to have to send someone, so then you're not allowed to buy a replacement because of this problem. You may be causing that this guy should be al yadcha nitrad. So I don't know, maybe there's a situation in where there's a family that's afraid maybe their family will be selected by the call, but they weren't yet. But they're afraid that maybe they will, so they want to preempt it by buying a replacement. Okay, then you can't do it because I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly what the Tzemach Tzedek means over here, but his point is, if you have this maman of shech where someone needs to go anyway, then you have the right to go ahead and to purchase the replacement. Now the tshuva continues with two more important points. I want to continue. One is that Tzemach Tzedek is going to solve the al yadcha nitra, the David HaMelech problem. We'll call it the David HaMelech problem. He's going to solve the problem in another way. How is he going to solve the problem in another way? By actually engaging in a little bit more of a traditional halachic analysis rather than divrei agada from the Gemara about David HaMelech, something that you would expect the Tzemach Tzedek to have raised first. But he doesn't. He brings it after, and then the solution to this other problem is going to be the solution to the David HaMelech problem. I'll summarize outside. What's the other problem? The halachic issue that you have here is lifnei iver l'sita michshol. You're not allowed to place a stumbling block in front of a blind person, which halacha understands that to mean to cause someone else to sin. So what we're calling till now the David HaMelech problem, really we could just legally call it a lifnei iver l'sita michshol type of problem. Now, what's the easy way, so to speak, out of lifnei iver l'sita michshol? If the guy could do the avera anyway. So what's the case? The guy could do the avera anyway. So a nazir, you're not allowed to hand a nazir a cup of wine. You're helping him do an avera. Yeah, but what if he's standing right here and he could pick it up himself? So then there's no lifnei iver l'sita michshol. The lifnei iver l'sita michshol doesn't apply because he could stand, he could pick it up, he could pick it up on his own. However, before you run away with that and say, oh, so you have no lifnei iver l'sita michshol problem. And let me apply it to our case. If you're not going to buy the replacement, he's going from town to town. And he's saying, I'm willing to sell myself for X amount to go as a replacement to the military. You're not going to buy him, someone else is going to buy. Right? So that would be similar to saying, you're not going to give him the nazir the cup of wine, and the nazir is going to reach it out on his own, and so therefore you don't have lifnei iver l'sita michshol problem. Before you could reach that conclusion, you have to recognize there's a Toisus. Toisus in Shabbos, Daf Gimel Amud Aleph, where Toisus says that even if you don't have lifnei iver l'sita michshol, there's still an issa darabanan of misayeya. You're not allowed to help someone else do an avera. So even if you say you don't have lifnei iver l'sita michshol because this guy is going to get purchased by someone else, still you're getting involved. You're still a problem misayeya. So the solution to that is another Gemara. What's the other Gemara? Rav Ashi had access to, he owned a lot of wood, trees, and he sold firewood to Oivdei Avodah Zarah that worshipped with fire. So Ravina tells him, lifnei iver l'sita michshol, you can't cause someone to do Avodah Zarah. So lifnei iver l'sita michshol. Now remember, you have over here the fact that if you're not going to sell them wood, they could buy it from someone else, right? But we still know that there's still an issur of misayeya, which may be what Ravina meant. Lifnei iver l'sita michshol still applies, at least on a rabbinic level. So he said, no. I'm selling them wood. Most people and most of the wood that they're going to purchase is they're going to use for regular things, for the home, not for the Avodah Zarah. So in other words, there's two reasons. This Gemara gives you two reasons why you have no lifnei iver l'sita michshol together. Number one, they could buy wood somewhere else. Number two, that itself is not enough. You still have an Isser Darabanan. Fine. But there's a good chance, in fact, the majority of a chance that they're not even going to do an Isser with this wood. Oh, so put those two together, the Tzemach Tzedek says, now let's come back to our case. Let's put it together and explain why you don't have a problem with Lifnei Iver Lisita Michshel over here. Number one, if you're not going to purchase a guy's services, someone else is going to purchase his services. That itself is not enough. Yeah, but number two, most wood is going to be used for good purposes. Most soldiers are not going to fry out in the military. Most soldiers are not going to assimilate. Most aren't going to convert to Christianity. And so therefore, you don't have a Lifnei Iver Lisita Michshel problem because you have both. You need to have both of these together. Number one, the guy anyway is going to is going to purchase the services. He's going to be purchased by someone else. And number two, Roiv is Shaloi Yechta. This is how the Tzemach Tzedek says this, why we don't have Lifnei Iver Lisita Michshel. And then he comes back to the David HaMelech problem, and he says, if you're not going to have a Lifnei Iver Lisita Michshel problem, then that's enough separation to say that even if the guy does drop Judaism, it's not going to be al yodcha nitrod. Why? Because look, number one, the guy was anyway going to take the job from someone else, so it's your fault. And number two, most don't end up having a problem. Are not going to end up having a problem. So therefore, if it happens, it's not like you did anything wrong. It's not you're to blame. And therefore, you don't have a David HaMelech problem. That's his solution to this issue. I should just point out that although the majority of what we've been doing is the Shal's Chuvas of the Tzemach Tzedek Simin Yoredea Simin Tzadik Beis, the Lifnei Iver discussion is actually truncated here, and there's another tshuva of the Tzemach Tzedek that's clearly about the same topic, and in fact in the Ksav Yad they're back to back with each other, and there he gets more into the issue of the Lifnei Iver Lisita Michshel, and the way I explained it now is based on what you have over there, and that's today printed as Yeredea Simin Reish Tzadik, if I recall correctly. There's still one more big issue that the Tzemach Tzedek needs to address, that he does address, and we're coming to the end. The Tzemach Tzedek, basically what we're holding right now it's mutter. A guy is offering you give him money, he's your replacement, it's mutter where we're holding right now. Says the Tzemach Tzedek, there's one area, however, I'm not comfortable with this. What's the area? He quotes a din in the Gemara, where the Gemara says that if someone inherits property from their father, they're not allowed to sell that property until they're 20 years old. Why? We're afraid that they're going to make a bad deal, and it's simply not going to, because they aren't old enough and mature enough to know a good deal from a bad deal. And so therefore we don't let them sell off the father's inheritance that he had. So what do you see from here, says the Tzemach Tzedek? You see that in Yiddishkeit we don't really trust people's judgment in commercial matters when they're under 20 years old. What's the problem here? The problem over here is that to go to the Russian military is between 12 and 25. So if the person is 20 to 25, no problem. I don't have a problem with that. But if the person is between 12 and 20, so the Tzemach Tzedek says, I feel a little uncomfortable because the Torah, maybe he's making a bad deal for himself. And we see that halacha is concerned about a real estate deal under 20 years old. Now, there's a few possible ways of getting out of this, the Tzemach Tzedek says. One is to say, you know why we have no concern? There's a concept of someone who sells himself, a Jew, sells himself into slavery, Eved Ivri. Does it say anywhere that a 14-year-old can sell himself as Eved Ivri? Does it say that? Does it say anywhere that an 18-year-old can sell himself as Eved Ivri because he's under 20? No. So what do you see? That maybe this is a thing that only somehow applies to land and doesn't apply to when you're selling yourself. That's one way of getting out of it. Another way of getting out of it is even when it comes to land, if the guy inherits his father's property and gives it a matana to someone, that's allowed. Why? Because so the Gemara assumes that a sale maybe he's going to do wrong. But if it's a matana, then he must have thought about really, really well. The guy must have done a favor to him that's really, really important and really, really good. And so therefore must be considered all the factors, and therefore the matana is a matana. So Tzemach Tzedek says this is another solution to this problem. You could say, real estate, maybe you make a bad deal. But to sell yourself into the Russian military, no one makes a bad deal. You really thought about it well before you went and did it. If for a matana of land, the Gemara is convinced you think it through all the way, and therefore if you did it, it's okay. So then how much more so to sell yourself into the Russian military for 25 years? For sure, you thought about it well. And so these would be two possible ways of getting out of this problem and not being worried about the fact that the people are under 20 years old. But the Tzemach Tzedek at the end of the day, very interestingly, says, I'm still not comfortable. He quotes a lashon of the Gemara, just because in your head you have a way of maybe saying that it's mutter, therefore we're going to run with that. He says at the end of the day we find in one area Chazal said that under 20 is a din of a katan. And we know that a katan who's convinced to do something, a pitoy of a katan, is a din of a oinus. Even though he agreed, he consented or she consented, same for a ktana, halacha recognizes it as an oinus, as compulsion. And oibazai eich yesh lismoich ha'aretzainoi b'davar gadol kazen. Such a serious matter. Are we really able to rely on his decision? And that's how the Tzemach Tzedek leaves it off. In other words, the Tzemach Tzedek seems to say mutter, but not under 20, only from 20 to 25 years old. Now, I want to conclude by making 2 points. Number one, when you read this tshuva, the Tzemach Tzedek, you find, although he talks about the fact that there's going to perhaps be people who are yetzel tarbus ra and assimilate. Maybe he's alluding to conversion. At no point does the Tzemach Tzedek allude to the fact that there is an active program trying to convert people. That language does not appear at all in the tshuva, and it's something we know definitely happened, at least from 1829, and definitely with the children. There's another thing, when you read this tshuva, at no point does the Tzemach Tzedek make an observation from the field or from experience. At no point does he say, and as we've seen that, not once do we have that type of language. Number three, at no point in this tshuva does the Tzemach Tzedek deal with a certain reality that eventually became the reality, and that is the fact that people were being dragged against their will, the chappers. Tzemach Tzedek says it has to be Meritzoni Atoy, but he doesn't ever at any point add lines about, but to chap people or whatever, it's not okay and it's a serious sin, or it doesn't allude to that. I think the obvious conclusion to take from this is that this tshuva from the Tzemach Tzedek was written very, very early on during this tkufa. I would go so far as to say within the first year of when this Gzeira came out in 1827, that right then the Tzemach Tzedek sat down and wrote this tshuva analyzing the situation before there were chappers, before you could say anu royin, what's happening, and before you could talk about any program trying to convince especially the children to convert, and that's just my guess about the timing of when this tshuva was written. And finally, the ultimate conclusion is in the Farbrengen of Yud Gimel Nisan, Tafshem Mem Hey. It was the yard site of the Tzemach Tzedek, 1985, that the Rebbe said a story that Chassidim say, and the Frierdiker Rebbe said, that when the Tzemach Tzedek was in Petersburg in the 1840s, the Jewish soldiers who were in Kronstadt, which is in the area of Petersburg, they asked their commander to allow the Tzemach Tzedek to come to speak to them. And the military leadership allowed this to happen, and the Tzemach Tzedek came, and he spoke to them, and the Chassidus. He said to them words of Chassidus. What's the lesson of this story that Rebbe said? That today we have our own Cantonistim, and that is Jews who are, they don't realize how far they are from Yiddishkeit. So in that sense, these Jews are modern Cantonists. And the lesson of the story is that even such Cantonists, they are ready, willing, and able to hear what? Not just authentic Yiddishkeit, but they're willing and ready and able to hear the highest and deepest secrets of Torah and Neshmasa D'Oraisa. Because remember, these Cantonists asked for what? For the Tzemach Tzedek to speak to them. And what did the Tzemach Tzedek convey? He conveyed words of Chassidus. So true, the Cantonists also need to learn Aleph Beis. And true, they need to learn all the basics. But at the end of the day, they're ready also for Chassidus. Why? Because that's a mahus of a Yid. A Yid is that he's a Maimin ben Maimin, and therefore no matter where he is, in terms of observance of Yiddishkeit, he is ready to hear words of Neshmasa D'Oraisa.